Well, good morning. On March 9, several students at Calvin University set up a booth with a sign that said, "Homosexuality is a sin, convince me otherwise." While perhaps not the most winsome approaches, this is a university setting. And at universities, ideas should be able to be freely shared and debated. And these students were looking for people to debate them. And yet the response is quite interesting, to say the least. One professor, Jamie Smith, felt the need to write a post saying, quote, "All students are welcomed, affirmed, and loved. To our LGBTQ students always, but especially today, you are loved," end quote. Why did Jamie Smith feel the need to give an emotional response to something that the students wanted to debate? And then a group of concerned former students wrote a letter to Calvin begging the university to be more inclusive of LGBTQs. They wrote, quote, "This is an inability and unwillingness to provide care, support, and safety to its marginalized communities. We have witnessed and have been subjected to a culture that promoted, whether intentionally or not, white supremacy and anti-LGBTQ sentiments," end quote. Again, rather than calmly entering into a free exchange of ideas and debate, there was a huge emotional response. And this incident from those students was viewed as an act of hate against oppressed students. How does a group of students asking to debate a subject lead to accusations of hate? Why is feeling safe such a concern? What is going on here? What has taken place in our culture is a shift about how we view humanity. There is the rise of the modern self, expressive individualism, the emphasis on the psychological man, as we saw last time. A person is what he or she feels himself to be. I feel, therefore I am. That is primary. So anything that challenges a person about how one feels about himself is destroying what it means to be human. This is why those former students viewed this invitation to debate as violence. Jamie Smith had to state he affirmed them because what it means to be human is how one feels about himself. It's not enough to be tolerated. LGBTQs need to be fully accepted and validated. Anything less for them is a destruction on what it means to be human, or so the culture thinks. We are in the midst of major cultural shifts right now, and what is becoming more dominant is the cultural value of the modern self, and this is ingrained in us. It is what younger generations generally operate automatically by. It's what they have already adopted by default without question. And the culture is going to keep becoming entrenched into this worldview for a very long time. Carl Trueman explains that the conflicts we see in culture are the results of worlds clashing. There is what is known as first, second, and third world cultures. First world cultures are typically pagan. There are many gods that influence nature and even human destiny. The Druids or ancient Greeks or Romans would be examples of such cultures. Second world cultures are those characterized by faith in God. Western civilization is a second world, and its laws and policies have been shaped by the character of God. Because they are rooted in a higher sacred truth beyond themselves, first and second worlds have a moral and cultural stability, and they want to pass these values to the next generation. Third world cultures, in contrast, do not root the social order and moral imperatives in anything sacred. These cultures do have to justify their practices. They have to prove their practices are right, but they do so based on themselves, not a transcendent reality. Right now, America, along with all of Western civilization, has become a third world culture. Third world cultures are unstable because they lack any foundation. Why do we see so many protests? Why do we see such unrest in this culture? Because our culture has disconnected itself from anything sacred. And so morality will end up being a matter of pragmatism, a notion of what are and what are not desirable outcomes. And those are shaped by whatever pathologies of culture rule the day. There is no solid ground anymore by which to agree upon anything. We see these dynamics at work of third world cultures in the example of abortion. A prohibition against abortion depends on a sacred understanding of personhood. When personhood is connected to the idea of image of God, one can say abortion is immoral. And once one removes the sacred order, then an embryo status can be contested. Pragmatism must rule then, and so personhood becomes associated with what we can see as people. Well, what is a person? What we see. One who can breathe and think and live on his own. So therefore, a fetus is not a human being. And then abortion is also a question of whether giving birth to a child will be conducive to a mother's mental well-being. Right? All moral decisions become highly subjective, focused on how a person feels. There's no higher order, so all we have left is ourselves. And if we feel a certain way, well then, therefore it must be true. This isn't just about abortion. It's about how all moral problems are considered. The primary categories are not is it true or does it honor God, but will it make me happy? Does it harm someone else's psychological well-being? Though right now, America is a third world culture, there are plenty of people in a second world culture, and both cultures exist simultaneously. And there's a lot of turmoil in America because worlds are colliding. And those believing in a sacred order are clashing with those who believe there is no sacred order. There are two completely different ways of looking at reality. And this makes communication very difficult. Truman writes, quote, "When a representative of a second world clashes with a representative of a third world, there is no real argument taking place. There is no common authority on which they might agree on terms of debate in order to determine exactly what they are debating. The one looks to the sacred order. The other looks to the immanent order. In short, the bases on which these representatives of different cultures make their judgments are completely opposite of each other and contradictory of each other." So, of course, we see the anger and the angst here in America rising. We can't even speak to each other. In a third world culture, one has to resort to feelings to make moral decisions. We have what is called emotivism, which is the idea that all moral judgments are nothing but expressions of preferences and inner feelings. Therefore, many LGBTQs do not want to debate the ethics of their position. They don't care about the ethics of their position. They do not want to engage in a rational discussion with those who think otherwise. Emotion becomes the main tool if anything is debated. So everything becomes passionate, and then those who differ from accepting them are labeled as haters, doing violence to minorities. Rationality in a debate requires people talking about standards and universal concepts. But since those things are rejected in third world cultures, all that is left is emotion. So others who disagree can be labeled as having prejudice. We see this in the Supreme Court decision in 2013, the United States versus Windsor, which struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, leading many to say that religious objections to homosexuality are rooted in phobia. You see, it's the emotional argument. You're wrong because you're just full of fear. If emotion is the only way to argue and push a point, then any discussion is impossible. So we see anger in today's world, people yelling at each other over ideas. No one can calmly discuss things. And even if we say, let's calmly talk about things, people don't understand what that means. And they will view that as oppressive. Third world cultures are really anti-cultures, seeking to repudiate all that has come before it. C.S. Lewis coined the term chronological snobbery to refer to those who look at the past as stuffy and oppressive. In third world cultures, chronological snobbery has become the basic instinct in all areas of life. Whereas once universities, intellectuals, other institutions were conduits for the transmission and preservation of culture, now these classes and institutions are devoted to the subversion, destabilization, and destruction of culture's traditions. And it's not like they're trying to tear down things to replace it with something new and better. It's destruction for the sake of destruction. Thus, third world cultures are not really cultures, but anti-cultures. We are not replacing something less than ideal with something else that is a better version of the true and beautiful. It's just tear down and only tear down. And sadly, those who cry out oppression and tear down, they become oppressors themselves because they've got nothing better with which to replace what they have destroyed. They want to take down one version of depravity and replace it with a worse version of depravity. Third world cultures, being anti-culture, are anti-history. People can readily tear down statues, rewrite history books, and not care at all because history is a relic of the past. We say, but we need to learn the lessons from history. But to say that implies there's universal truth passed down from generation to generation. But without any universal standard of truth anymore, learning from history becomes impossible. We say learn the lessons of history, people don't understand what that means. They can't process it. They don't understand that sentence because they've already internally rejected all universal truth. So we say we learn from history, it just doesn't make sense to people in a third world country. It doesn't fit in their categories of how the world works. Everything in our society is designed to repudiate the past. Companies such as Apple nurture dissatisfaction and the need to always have the new. The fashion industry is set up to always create new markets. The idea is that the present is only momentarily satisfying. The future will bring new and better delights. In a third world culture, Karl Marx becomes the number one figure. He argued that all of history is characterized by class struggle. It's about the suppressed always rising up to overthrow the ruling class and create a revolution. And then as time goes on, a new suppressed class rise up. And history is always about victimizers and victims, and they just keep going until forever. It's a very dark, bleak view of reality without any hope, because class struggles will be ongoing forever. And the only thing that can be done is to keep tearing down the past, keep tearing down, keep liberating, keep liberating. And that just sounds like an awful, violent, unhealthy way to live. In third world cultures, there is what is called death works. This is coined by Carl Trueman, whose work we're using to talk about culture in these talks. So there's what's called death works. In second world cultures, there might be art designed to promote values and make society better. A death work, by contrast, represents an attack on established art forms and is designed to subvert the deeper moral fabric of society. Death works make old values look ridiculous. The most common example of a death work is pornography. In second world cultures, sex is sacred. The Bible teaches sex is reserved for marriage, and marriage is a picture of Christ's relationship to the church. Pornography presents sex as an end to itself. Pornography also does grave injury to the dignity of participants, destroying the sacred idea of what it means to be human. And the main problem of pornography is not what many religious conservatives claim it to be. Religious conservatives claim the main problem is lusting after someone else, which is true. That's part of it. But the problem is deeper, because pornography repudiates any notion that sex has significance beyond the act itself, and therefore rejects any notion that sex is part of a higher order. Pornography promises its values are liberating, while making older, higher orders of morality look bad. And thus pornography subverts the sacred and makes the sacred look oppressive. Abortion is like a death work. You have the image of a fetus flushed down the toilet. Abortion is not a death work just because it's immoral, but because it profanes that which is sacred. Human life made in the image of God. Abortion revises the definition of what it means to be a person and also makes that which was once thought to be a person into something akin to garbage or excrement. This is what third world cultures do. They turn the sacramental into the excremental, the sacred order into a piece of garbage to be flushed away. No doubt, many Christians, because of the clash of worlds, feel they are in the end times. And I believe and teach we've been in the end times since Christ's death and resurrection. There have been antichrists in every age, and we will have to battle with the powers and principalities in every age until Christ returns. But I can see why so many people right now feel like Christ could return tomorrow. And I certainly hope he does come tomorrow. Over the past few years, America has undergone major seismic cultural shifts. The world many of us grew up with is not there anymore. And Christians are finding it harder to live in this world. Second worlds are clashing with third worlds. Many churches and denominations have adopted, sadly, the values of the third world culture. It is a scary time to live. And I write this to you so that we can be strengthened to persevere. We might be tempted to give in, but we must not give in. We must not succumb to what is evil. Psalm 11 verse 3 says, "When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do?" We will not do what the people did in verses 1 and 2. Flee like a bird to a mountain because we're so scared of the bent bows of the wicked. No, we will do what verse 4 calls us to do. Trust in the Lord. And it says, the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne. He observes everyone on earth. His eyes examine them. The Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. On the wicked he will rain fiery coals and burning sulfur. A scorching wind will be their lot. For the Lord is righteous. He loves justice. The upright will see his face. And finally, we must not let these differences lead us to hate others. Love is still required. We don't have to validate and affirm, but we do love. And remember, while we were sinners, God still loved us and died for us. With love, have relationships with others, and then we may be able to proclaim Christ and save souls yet. Well, that ends this article, and we'll continue on next week or the week after as I have time, but I've got a few more talks in mind yet to do. So we will see you next time. Goodbye.